I can't.
A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead is a brand new horror video game set in the world of the Quiet Place films. I'm actually quite a big fan of the Quiet Place movies. Weirdly enough though, I like the second one noticeably more than the first one. I feel like I'm probably in the minority there. I also thought A Quiet Place Day 1 was pretty good too. I actually reviewed it on this channel. And ever since the first Quiet Place movie came out in 2017, 2016, I thought that it was a world that was just waiting to be discovered further. Don't get me wrong though, I'm not that dude who thinks everything needs to be a franchise, but when it comes to newer horror movies and newer film franchises in general from the past decade or so, I think A Quiet Place is one that just deserves further exploration. So with that being said, when they announced A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, I was pretty excited. A horror video game seems like a perfect next step in this franchise, and if there's anything I like more than horror movies, it's horror video games. That's when I actually feel the fear myself. But if I'm being honest with you, which I am, half of my brain was a little on the fence with this release because in most of the marketing for this game, it looked like a stealth-driven horror game with no combat at all, which makes perfect sense, by the way. I feel like anything else for this franchise would just be weird. But generally speaking, even though I love horror games, I'm not the biggest fan of horror games that have no combat and rely mostly on stealth mechanics. It's really not my thing, and despite how hard I've tried to like games in that subgenre, I usually end up tapping out within the first few hours. There are some exceptions to that rule though. Still Wakes the Deep came out earlier this year, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I thought this game was really, really entertaining. And even though I'm not the biggest fan of this subgenre of horror games, I figured if there's any game that can really pull me in despite my preconceived notions, it's a game like A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead, where I'm already a fan of the world and the gameplay mechanics of stealth are already inherently built into that world. But then just as I sat down to play the game, it dawned on me that despite it being a Quiet Place game, despite it being a horror game, and I love horror games, it's still a $30 movie tie-in game. So how good can it really be? But anyways, A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead came out today, and I've been playing it non-stop for hours now, which means I have a lot of thoughts I want to share with you guys. So I'm going to jump into the review. I'm going to show you guys some raw gameplay, but before I do that, consider hitting that subscribe button if you haven't already. If you're new here, I talk about video games all the time. Day one reviews just like this, other video game discussions, and horror video games get special treatment on this channel. My next review will be a dual review for the Halloween and the Ash vs. Evil Dead Retro Realms games, more horror movie tie-ins. Those games come out tomorrow, and I will be playing those tomorrow, but I'm actually gonna wait a few days before I review them because I don't want to do back-to-back reviews, one right after the other. I want to give each video a little bit of its own breathing room. But anyway, enough with this introduction. Let's talk about A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead. So first off, this is a first impressions review, but based on the trophy list and the percentage tracker on the PlayStation 5, I know I'm a good chunk of the way through already, but still, I haven't seen those credits roll, so just keep that in mind as I share my thoughts with you. And also, this review will be spoiler free. I will talk about the story, but I won't get into any super specific details, and all of the gameplay that you're seeing is from the first few chapters of the game. But anyway, what exactly is A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead? It's pretty much what I assumed it was based on the trailers. It's a stealth-driven horror game where each chapter essentially has you going from point A to point B while being as quiet as possible, and has you try to avoid being mercilessly mauled by aliens. It has some light exploration exploration, some incredibly light environment puzzles, some intense sequences, and it's quite story-driven and character-based as well. And I actually want to start this review off by talking about the story and the characters. You play as a character named Alex, and right at the start of the game, she finds out she's pregnant, and then immediately after she learns that news, she sees someone close to her get killed by the monsters, and then, shortly after that introduction, she is essentially driven from her home base by the rest of her community, and is forced to trek out into the wilderness on her own. And I'm gonna be honest with you guys, the story doesn't really do much for me. I feel like I've seen this story be told a million times already, in a million more interesting ways. It doesn't really do anything to stand out or feel fresh in the sea of post-apocalyptic survival stories we get across all mediums. And it honestly, in my opinion, doesn't really feel that fresh in its own Quiet Place universe either. Almost every big moment I've seen so far feels like a remixed version of a scene we saw in one of the 3 films. But to be fair, there's only so much you can do when it comes to the horror and the thrilling aspects of this universe. They're blind aliens that pounce when noise is heard. It's human characters coming to grips with a new, desolate world and lifestyle. So I wasn't really expecting the story in this game to feel that fresh or new, but I was surprised to see at how little I did end up caring. And I think a big reason for that is that I really don't like this main character really at all. It often feels like her one personality trait is that she has asthma, and it comes up in conversation far more often than what's believable. And every line of dialogue she says, she sounds like she's on the verge of tears and hysterics. Every time she sees a gun, even if it's just sitting in a gun cabinet, she gasps, as if she was just stabbed in the lungs by Crocodile Dundee. She apparently really likes music, but only music when it comes to lyrics. Very early on, you find a note that has all her lyric ideas, and it reads like something you'd find in an 8th grader's notebook. And then at one point, her boyfriend urges her to sing, and she acts like if she were to do so, it would set the very foundation of her being on fire. But then 3 seconds later, she just bursts into song anyway.
Oh, screw it. All is quiet, all is calm, though the storm isn't gone. See the sun catch my breath. Oh, I know what comes next.
Yeah, honestly, the whole story, especially when it comes to the characters and the characterization, feel very YA to me. Like this would be the story and character work you'd find in a Quiet Place Junior novelization at the Scholastic Book Fair on a chilly fall day. I honestly wouldn't be surprised if the climax of this story has the main character turn her pregnancy test into a shiv and then proceed to stab one of the aliens to death with it after realizing that nothing can hurt you as long as you have the power of friendship. Which sucks because the performances from the voice actors are actually pretty good. Even the main character of Alex has good voice acting for sure, and in the rare instances where she acts relatively normal and not so extreme all the time, it was an enjoyable and believable performance. It's just a shame that the writing is super melodramatic 95% of the time, with every character and every line of dialogue and every note you read. There's just so much angst and the undeniable stench of something wanting desperately to be deep when it's just derivative instead. But I believe that is the most negative part of this review, and with that out of the way, let's talk about the gameplay. Like I said earlier, most of the level design is super simple. It's basically just you going from point A to point B. Sometimes there's slight, and I mean slight, branching pathways, but don't expect this game to have any real sense of exploration or openness. But that's not to say it can't still be fun, because at the end of the day, despite a lot of my criticisms and a lot of the shortcomings this game has, I did find myself having fun, especially after the first 2 chapters when most of the gameplay mechanics become apparent and the game feels a little less hand-holdy. But anyway, while you're making your way from point A to point B, you have to be as quiet as possible so you don't alert the alien monsters. That means pressing gently on the left analog, crouching when necessary, and not moving too fast, which is why all the gameplay footage you're seeing now probably looks like I'm moving at a snail's pace. But the game does have some other pretty cool mechanics to help spice things up a little bit. First, you have this device thing that the main character made herself. It has flashing lights on it that go up or down depending on how noisy stuff is. The bar on the left is how loud the environment around you is, and the bar on the right is how loud you're being, and you want to try and keep your volume quieter than the volume of the environment. And for the most part, I found that to be a pretty cool mechanic. If it's a quiet night and there's rocks and gravel all around you, you gotta be extra stealthy. But if it's raining out and there's lightning and loud thunderclaps, you can breathe a little and move more swiftly. Then there's your inhaler. Like I said, the main character has asthma and you have to manage it so you don't have an asthma attack. Your breathing gets worse when you do various different things, like if you need to pick up and move a heavy object, or if you enter an old, dusty and dirty building, or of course if there's an alien close by who could just find and kill you at any moment. You find inhalers and pills across levels that help steady your breathing out, and if you do get an asthma attack, you're hit with a quick time event. Then there's your flashlight. You have a flashlight with you, which you'll need to help you see in some of the darker environments. Obviously, that's what people use flashlights for. It runs out of battery pretty quickly, so you need to pay attention to how often you use it, and you have to keep track of how many batteries you have with you so you don't get screwed. And of course, there's the alien monsters themselves, and I have a feeling this is where a lot of potential players might be really disappointed with the game. It's not like Mr. X in the Resident Evil 2 remake or the Xenomorph in Alien Isolation. The monsters in this game aren't always there. They're not always stalking you. They're not always somewhere in the environment, even if they're just out of sight. You're not going to accidentally bump into one pretty much at all, and that did lessen the immersion for me quite a bit, if I'm being honest. Instead, the monster only pops up if you make too much noise, or in one of the many scripted events. For me, though, personally, I didn't mind too much because I feel like it's a little more on brand with A Quiet Place and how those aliens worked in those movies. But for people who were hoping this would be a game with a full-on stalker-style enemy, that's just not the case here. But anyway, obviously none of those gameplay mechanics are super groundbreaking or anything, but to be honest, I did find it pretty fun juggling between everything, managing my asthma and my sound while making sure my flashlight didn't die, while again simultaneously trying to avoid a monster. It can be engaging and it can be fun, and once I stopped thinking so critically, I realized that A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead does have a decent amount of fun to offer, as long as you lower your standards a little bit. But anyways, this is a weird game for me because I know for a fact that a lot of people, maybe even most people, probably most people, won't care for this game. Like I've mentioned, the gameplay mechanics and the level design is super simplistic. It doesn't really offer anything new, and the story and characters are pretty unlikable, at least in my opinion. But I'd be lying to you if I said I didn't still enjoy this game more than I disliked it. I'm happy I played it, and I'm gonna finish it when I upload this review, and I'll be happy it's on my shelf alongside my other horror games. But again, I don't think that'll be the case for everyone. I do think the Quiet Place licensing saves it a little bit. The fact that it needs to fit within the already established rules of that universe pretty much gives the game a get out of jail free card when it comes to the simplistic design and mechanics. Also, the fact that it's only $30 saves it a lot too. It's easier to recommend at that price point, but still, I can't and I won't recommend it to everyone. But if you like these kinds of horror games, the cheaper, stealth-driven horror games that can arguably be called walking simulators, this is one of the more fun, one of the more engaging ones that I've personally played. But again, I haven't played that many, and I'm sure the fact I'm already a fan of the Quiet Place movies helps a lot. But if you're not into those games or you don't care about the films, I'd say this game is an easy pass. But anyway, that's my quick and brief thoughts on A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead after playing it for a few hours. Depending on how this video performs, I'll try and fit in a follow-up review after I beat the game fully and give you guys a lot of my more in-depth thoughts. Have you played A Quiet Place: The Road Ahead yet? If you have, let me know what you're thinking about it in the comments down below. Are you liking it more than me? Are you liking it less than me? Or are you pretty mixed on it like me? And if you haven't played it, let me know. Do you plan to? Is this going to be in your backlog? Are you going to get to it eventually? Are you going to play it tomorrow? Or are you going to ignore it completely? Either way, I look forward to hearing your reasoning in the comments down below. Once again, consider subscribing if you haven't already, and thank you for watching, especially if you watched this far.
Whoa. How long have you had these?
You like them?
They're incredible. Which one's your favorite? Jesus.
Huh? Oh, right. Just pretend they don't exist. That's what I do.